This is going to be like a regular episode. I've just got to think that you're sat next to me here, and that tiny thing is that thing.
Yeah.
Coming up, as we continue the countdown to the 1-year anniversary of the ANA's Media Transparency Report, this week we look at the state of media talent. Hello and welcome to IDCOM's Media Snack, episode 78. So we continue our countdown towards the 1-year anniversary of the ANA's Media Transparency Report. And this week we're going to look at the state of talent, both within advertisers and agencies and the wider market, all coming up on Media Snack in just the time it takes to eat a sushi roll. Right, mate, so the astute viewers will spot this little line down the middle here. Means that David and I are in significant different time zones. How's Tokyo this week?
It's warm and humid. Yes, I'm in Tokyo. I've been here for 3 days now, listening to some agency presentations on a review that we're managing globally, and these are the Japanese pitch presentations that I'm attending.
Good. Cool. So we're going to pick up the same theme we started last week. If you saw last week's episode, it's we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of the ANA's Media Transparency Report, which we've always talked about a lot in the last year. And what we're doing is, in that countdown, just having a think about some of the significant change that we've felt and observed in the last 12 months in some key areas. Last week we talked about media transparency, and this week we're going to look at media talent. Let's start on the advertiser side, right? So within the report that the ANA produced, they made a very specific reference to what they called lack of capability, lack of sufficient governance, gaps in media knowledge on the advertiser side, which had been, they said, some of the reasons for what they found in their investigation and in their findings. How do you think that's changed over the last year? Have we seen more advertisers staffing up on media?
Yeah. Well, the ANA report championed the role of this chief media officer, if you remember, and what they meant by that was brands should look to invest in senior media leaders to take control and to manage media governance internally. And whilst perhaps the specific brief for chief media officers have been relatively rare to find, what we have found is that a number of brands that previously perhaps hadn't considered the role of a media leader internally are looking to find that. And those people are being found actually from within the media community as opposed to the procurement community. So I think it's a really positive move. A number of brands that prior to the ANA report hadn't really considered about bringing media talent internally have done that and have either secured the resource and are beginning to build an internal media team or are certainly in the lookout for a very specific type of candidate. And those candidates are being sourced from the media expert side rather than perhaps the procurement side. So it's a really, really positive move forward, I think. Yeah.
And we haven't really seen chief media officers. Back in June, Bill Duggan, who's the media lead, if you like, at the ANA, wrote an article calling for more brands to invest in that senior executive position responsible for the media investment and media strategy. There's John Nitti, who's at Verizon in the US, is kind of famously a chief media officer. We've talked a lot about Jerry D'Angelo at P&G, who by name is not chief media officer, but essentially plays that role as a very senior kind of providing very senior governance over media investment. And we talked a little bit last week about this partnership that needs to exist between a CMO, chief marketing officer, and their kind of media leader. Do you think we're going to see more of that level kind of caliber hirings within media? Because I saw this week, Airbnb are kind of re-announcing that they're looking for a chief media officer, which I think has been on the table for some time. And maybe struggling to find the people.
Yeah, I think they are. I think brands are taking more of an interest in very senior media leaders that have got the gravitas to get traction internally. I mean, we talked about the role and the requirements of a senior media leader when this first came out from the ANA, and we agreed, I think, that that person needed to have a sense of authority to gain traction internally. And I don't think that has changed. I think there is still a great deal of talent out in the marketplace that can fulfill these kind of roles. But you know, the requirements differ. The role of a chief media officer, perhaps for Procter & Gamble, and the role that Jerry is fulfilling is going to be massively different to the role that Airbnb are looking to fill, simply because they're very different businesses. And so finding the nuances within the marketplace to deliver against that requirement is perhaps challenging, but finding the right person is all the more important. So I know that the Airbnb role has been open for a number of months, and obviously they're being very, very careful in trying to find the right person. But the fact that they are determined to make sure that there is a media leader in that organization that can provide stewardship and governance for media is brilliant news, and it's being championed by the CMO. So you know, they're talking about, you know, there was a lot of concern about whether the role of a very senior media leader would complement or conflict perhaps with the role of the CMO. It's the CMO that is championing that particular role within Airbnb. So obviously they see that as a complementary skill set. Yeah,
and I think I agree. That's a really good sign. I mean, you and I and others in the team here, we've been speaking to many of our clients, global media directors, global marketing directors, and CMOs over the last year about this kind of role, and you know, gathered lots of different points of view and perspective as to what proper media leadership was going to look like, whether you call it chief media officer or whatever you call it, but actually just applying that kind of executive governance, if you like, and that and also the strategic view of media as an investment to drive a business outcome, lots of the things that we keep talking about. And what we've decided to do, we kind of wanted to announce as well today, is based on lots of those conversations that we've had, we're just realizing that there's perhaps the opportunity to bring a lot of people together and start to really define what that kind of role means, so that businesses can perhaps more easily understand this new type of media leadership that you know, large marketing organizations are going to kind of need to look at and invest in. And so we've explored a number of options. We think the best way to do that is actually to create a group on LinkedIn, which we're launching today. It's going to be called the Chief Media Officers. And it's a working group really just for chief media officers, obviously, global media directors, whether global, regional, or local, but people with senior leadership and responsibility for media and investment. And will be, for those of you kind of that fall within that definition, you should be receiving invites from us. If you don't do so and you want to be invited, just get in touch. And that will hopefully create a forum where we can really start to encourage people within that definition to start to collaborate to really define those roles and share what they think are going to be the most meaningful skills required to support their CMOs in their organizations in the future. Yeah. So let's talk about on the agency side. You've been sat in the last kind of 2 months really all around the world, sitting in pitches alongside the marketing and media leaders, looking at not just agency talent, right? You're looking at all kinds of businesses these days on behalf of advertisers. So what would be a year on from perhaps when we last talked about media talent, what have you been seeing?
Well, as you say, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of agencies. I've sat in through kind of, you know, many hours of agency presentations, and my first observation is that you know, the talent is still there. Some of the work that we've seen come out of the agencies has been fantastic and hugely appreciated by the clients that we've been accompanying on these pitches. The one thing that I would say as a follow-on to that is that there perhaps is a question as to the level of bench strength within the agencies now. I mean, we see a lot of the same people, attending the presentations. They're obviously very senior stakeholders within the agencies, and so you would expect that. But the diversity of talent that is kind of being brought forward, it perhaps isn't there. And so, they're either keeping them hidden, or they're working on other pieces of business, which is perhaps the case. But a truly great agency has depth in talent, and you kind of wonder whether they are struggling to secure that comprehensiveness of talent, simply because we know the tech companies are going in with their big salaries. We know that there are multiple more opportunities, both on the client side with media roles, on the vendor side, on the tech side, starting up their own businesses. It's getting harder and harder, I think, for agencies to secure the consistency of talent. And as we both know, and it is the talent that can distinguish and differentiate between one brilliant agency and another. The processes are often very the same. We know that the buying capabilities don't really differ. It's the talent that really makes the difference. And I just wonder whether they're beginning to access the same level of talent as they once were.
Yeah. And actually, that exact point, the idea of testing the bench strength has led us to change the way that we pitch now, so that we can avoid just having the same pitch winners from the agencies turn up to every global presentation. In the last few months we've been running kind of 8 or 10 perhaps like significant parallel projects, and you see the same faces turn up week after week. Maybe they're considered by the agency to be the pitch winner, but so that's prompting us obviously to change the process and make sure that we can dig into the other talent in the business, and also it's of course it's really important to see the people that are going to be working on your business.
And you're absolutely right, Tom. But and when an agency gets it right, it really shines through. When an agency perhaps doesn't get the casting right and doesn't bring that level of energy and strategic brilliance to a presentation, the client has a tendency to think that the B team are in play, and that is a real shame. But the distinction between an agency's A team and perhaps an agency that is struggling for whatever reason to bring the right level of resource into a meeting can be enormously damaging to that other agency.
So the other thing to mention about agency talent, I think back in probably October, November, I think in one of these episodes, we talked about the changing of the guard probably that we would expect on the media agency side. And noted that there hadn't really been any significant change of leadership or restructure in media agencies for maybe a decade, I think within a week of us kind of saying that we expected this to be the case, then there was a significant reorg at Group M with Kelly Clark taking the helm again, or taking the global helm. So there's been more change on Group M, which has been interesting this week. We hear that Lindsey Patterson, who's the global CEO of Maxus, one of the WPP media agencies, has been given a new role within Group M to be Chief Transformation Officer and reporting to Kelly, which sounds like again it's a role that we've been wondering whether agencies would create, given that they've really got to start disrupting from within. From the number of different external threats that they're facing, which we've talked about a lot. So I think that's a really good indicator, perhaps, that agencies are looking to evolve their own businesses and finding new types of leader.
Yeah, and Lindsey, we know Lindsey well. She's a brilliant operator. She's done a fantastic job at Maxus, both when she was CEO of the UK and now in a global role over there. obviously she doesn't have enough to do in that position because she's been given this extra scope. But I mean, if there is a senior media agency leader that will kind of champion that transformational agenda, it's Lindsey. I mean, what exactly that means, I'm not entirely sure. I've only just covered a couple of the articles in the trade press today, but I'm sure it'll become clearer with time. But I think she's going to be, whatever it is, I'm sure she'll be brilliant at it.
Yeah, to me, the thing that's significant is that this is, Lindsey is not necessarily the person you would give it to if you wanted somebody to kind of sit in a dark room and figure out all the answers. Yeah. Lindsey's, I mean, the fact that she's been given this role by Kelly suggests that this is a very visible role, right? This is going to be a client-facing, industry-facing, like cross-organization role, which is good to see.
Yeah.
This is not someone kind of redesigning in the back rooms. This with a transformation agenda to be so visible, I think is a good sign, and would anticipate that other agencies might follow. Yeah. Might follow suit. Yeah. I mean, it brings us to, I suppose, the final consideration on media talent, which we just referenced there, is the consulting businesses. We've in the last few weeks been talking a lot about the consultancies. Hearing more and more about their potential plans to get into media buying. I think it's a matter of when, not if. Yeah. That is going to be another wave of attack, if you like, on agencies' media talent. I mean, I could anticipate that the consultancies, when they start to ramp up some form of media buying capabilities, they're going to raid agencies for some superstar talent in those areas, I think, to give themselves good momentum. That's going to be something which agencies perhaps are going to be required to defend again.
Yeah. And I mean, what we do know again is that they've got the big war chests, right? So the deeper their relationship with brands and clients become, the moment it's consulting, and there's obviously a lot of kind of digital scope that they work on, but as that becomes more holistic in its scope and its approach, they're going to not only need practitioners in execution if they decide to go into buying, but they're going to need senior client leaders. At the moment, that is where I think the agencies are still relatively strong. They've still got some very senior, experienced client stakeholder managers, if you like. But as soon as the consulting businesses decide that that's going to be an important part of their armory, it'll be open season, and they've got the money to go after them. So again, that's probably another area of concern that would have one or two senior agency CEOs keeping awake at night on.
Yeah. Okay. So there's been a significant amount of change, I think. I mean, whether we can credit that all the way back to the ANA's report, but I mean, as we keep saying, that's been the catalyst for lots of rethinking and new thinking, innovative thinking across media, both on the advertiser, agency, and indeed the vendor side. Well, I think we've seen a lot of change. We've seen more change in the last 12 months probably than we've faced in the last 12 years. Yeah. There's more to come, I think, with these kind of new disruptive threats from external or new innovative businesses around media. But anyway, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you very much for watching. That's all for this week's Media Snack. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Have a good weekend.